might not know is that Google is trying to cover up the fact that there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Instagram, Facebook, they're all jumping in on it. Today, we're going to be going through some of the biggest stories on the internet. To help me do that, I have Joy Pullman. Joy, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
So just some background. Joy is the executive editor of the Federalist. If you're not getting news from the Federalists, they are a great source of truth for conservatives and patriots. Joy is also the author of False Flag, Why Queer Politics Means the End of America. You've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this for about 4 years, but I've noticed the media is shifting as Kamala Harris becomes more and more important. I feel like they're a little bit trapped between continuing this fake narrative that Joe Biden is the greatest president in our history and getting Kamala Harris as far away from him and his policies as possible. Have you noticed that as well?
Oh, absolutely. So we're supposed to believe that Kamala is this wonderful, amazing, exciting person, when really I think a lot of her positive bump that she's getting now is just relief that Joe Biden is no longer the party's nominee. But the problem for Kamala, of course, is while she does have access to Joe Biden's war chest, his financial war chest, she also is tied to his failed policies. And she's been a point person on so many of them. It's really, really hard for Democrats to say that she is actually a great policy person when she is on the record as, and as you mentioned, this is being whitewashed off the internet, but she's in multiple rating systems been the most liberal senator on everything, from wanting to literally erase American energy, from saying we should have a conversation about banning meat, no more meat consumption to Americans, really a lot of things that do not play well in especially the states that are crucial for Democrats, this November, the Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania sort of states where, people might be interested in a social safety net, but they really don't want to see fracking ended. They don't want to see an end to their cars. They don't want to see, weak energy production, and certainly not, fewer hamburgers.
Yeah. So you mentioned this bump. I agree with you. I think that people are just relieved that it's not Joe Biden, especially after the debate. I think a lot of people were like, oh, wait a minute. You guys have been lying to us. The White House has been covering up the fact that this president has dementia and can barely function, that he's not even working a full-time job as president of the United States, that he's making major mistakes with global leaders while trying to run multiple wars at the same time. Like it's really, really scary. And yet Kamala Harris, like you say, she is tied to that. I personally see two big issues that she's going to have, and I hope that Trump will just hammer these. And I know there's more, but the first one is the fact that she played a major role in this White House cover-up of a demented, unable, weak-minded president. She is front row to these lies and this scam on the American people. And the fact that, people donated hundreds of millions of dollars being told that Joe Biden was the Bobby Fischer of mental games, that he was playing 5D chess against Putin, and that, these high inflation prices were because of Putin and not because of his incompetence. How do you think she continues to distance herself from that? The other one that I think she's really going to struggle with is, and they're trying to erase this as well, she was in charge of the border. And yet,
but don't say borders are, right? Have you seen the retconning? Oh man, literally outlets have changed their retroactively multiple years later, gone back in and edited out calling her the borders are, in order to comply with the new, everyone memory hold the borders czar talking point. And now we're going to say she really wasn't actually in charge of anything. She was looking at the root causes. Man, I love that. Well, the other, she has just so many negatives. So for example, she's run for president, now twice, last cycle in the primary and this cycle now as Democrats' apparent nominee, but she's never won any delegate votes from any Democrats, right? She dropped out of the race very early in 2016. And now, a very large number of the primaries, the majority of them are already completed before we get to the Democrat convention. And it was Joe Biden, who all of those Democrat delegates voted for, not for Kamala. So she's coming to the top of the ticket, having been explicitly chosen for her race and her sex, not for her capabilities in leadership, which she doesn't have any. If you look at her very thin, voting record in the Senate, it is a laundry list of the farthest left Californication causes. She, for example, she sponsored, bailouts of people who are rioting. She assisted people to get out of jail who went on to commit more violent crimes. So this is really not someone who can run on her record. The only thing she has to run on, is her skin color. But even that heritage doesn't look really good there because she's actually just, half Jamaican immigrant, which isn't a very strong tie to the typical Black voter, who's in this country as a descendant of American slaves.
Yeah. Well, and, before she was Joe Biden's running mate, they talked about, isn't it great to have this American Indian with Indian heritage, big focus on the fact that her family came from India and from Jamaica. And now all of a sudden she's the mouthpiece for Black Americans tied to slavery of our past. It's
not very authentic.
Yeah, it's incredibly inauthentic. But you know what? I think a lot of people don't take the time to look things up, just like they're not going to take the time to look up how many Black families she destroyed, how many men she put in jail for minor offenses for multiple years, how she rigged the system to keep Black prisoners in prison so that California could get cheap labor. Like, all of this is proven, and yet she is put on this pedestal as the greatest thing for the Black community since George Floyd. It's just very confusing.
It's really actually sad to see, the United States has many, many Black icons who deserve a lot of respect. So Clarence Thomas is my number one favorite. If he was a leftist, he would have his picture all over everything. He would be written up in all the magazines, and he absolutely deserves that. If you ever read one of his opinions, and I have multiple times, personal fan, he's more impressive than pretty much anybody in this entire country. I wish the entire Supreme Court was like him, but you know what? Because he does not obey the dictates of other people for what he should think because of his skin color, he's unpersoned and literally called, Uncle Tom and other racial slurs. While people with, again, not only do they not have a track record, but they have a track record of disaster like Kamala Harris, fail up all the way and pretend that, skin color is their excuse for getting way, way above their pay grade.
Yeah, no, he is great. His write-ups, his opinions are so articulate. It's fun to read his stuff. I want to talk about this shift from Biden over to Kamala Harris, but I want to go back. You guys, the Federalists, the first time you came on my radar was just after, like weeks after the 2020 election. Somebody had written an article about the miracle of Joe Biden winning the 2020 election, how he was off in some of the major cities, that he lost Ohio, he lost Florida, and that he lost 18 of the 19 bellwether counties that have indicated who would be president. Donald Trump swept those, and yet somehow he became the miracle that became president of the United States. Between midnight and 4 a.m., suddenly he's a genius that gets 81 million votes. How did he go from being the most popularly elected president, way more popular than Barack Obama? Like, Barack Obama looks like a moron compared to Joe Biden and his popularness. How did we get there to now being the person most called upon to step away from the White House?
Well, I think it's very clear that Democrats see, figures as a means to an end. So Joe Biden was a convenient excuse for them to take over the White House in 2020. They claimed that he was a moderate blue collar guy, even though I'm sure you and your listeners know that that's basically a bunch of made up hokum. He's not blue collar at all. He's been a grifter his entire life. Hardly worked, it hardly has ever put in a real day's work in his entire life. And you can tell that because, the corruption of his family is basically the way that they've gotten ahead is by selling access, not just him, but the entirety of his family. But he was a very good kind of excuse because, the media had cultivated for him this sort of moderate image, which again ran contra to his record in the Senate. He was years ago, speaking of Clarence Thomas, he was a judiciary chair during those hearings that Thomas called a high-tech lynching, just again, totally partisan, useless, empty-headed person from the beginning. Talk about gaffe machine. He really just is kind of a placeholder and a useful idiot in American politics. And that's really, the role that he played in the 2020 election when the media allowed him to run an entire campaign from his basement by stoking up all the, fears about COVID way, way beyond what the reality ought to have generated. Again, if we had Obama or Biden as a president during that time, the hysteria over COVID, I bet would have looked very, very different. So another thing that COVID allowed them to do was ballot harvest and increase millions of unverifiable custody chain of custody ballots flooded the entire country. So I grew up in Wisconsin, haven't lived there for 15, 20 years. My parents got 3 mail-in paper ballots for me at my childhood Wisconsin address. They didn't fill out any of them. They put them in the trash, but they could have, right? So we have at the very least, an unreliable security in that election. And, so even if what Democrats did, if they won fair and square, they really weren't able to prove it. The only thing that they would be able to do was basically tell all of us to sit down and shut up and pretend that the bipartisan commissions talking about how mail-in ballots, are one of the most unreliable methods of conducting votes, and bipartisan commissions, including those, chaired by Jimmy Carter in the past, had all made that very clear, as well as, myriad foreign elections and so on and so forth. So we had to memory hole all of that because, the facts didn't fit the narrative that they wanted to push on us. And they have control of the internet, so they can shut down speech that they don't like. They can shut down questioning. They can shut down people who say, look, we want good security so that everyone can trust that their votes are accurately counted. That's something that ought to be bipartisan. And so so you had a lot of American concern and unrest over exactly how that went down because it looked extremely suspicious. And so at the Federalist, as if you continue to watch our coverage, we have actually expanded our election reporting. We have an entire bureau dedicated to really investigating and looking at factual evidence. There was also a lot of completely wild and crazy claims about the election that later, proved not to be true and not to be trustworthy. I think partly because of the deliberately created atmosphere of distrust over the legitimate lack of security going on. So, the best response to that sort of thing really is to lock down the elections. But it absolutely is true that Democrats, one of their chief advantages is in ballot harvesting. They have a very large number of very low information, low energy voters. And so through ballot harvesting and extending election seasons out now, it used to be, one day, maybe in mail-in ballots for people who literally could not get to the polls. They're military, they're actually disabled in their homes. Maybe there would be an extra day, for some people in some jurisdictions, but that was immediately moved ever since, post-COVID. We've kept all of those so-called COVID, so-called temporary protocols to, in many states, election day is now election season. It's 2, 3, 4 weeks before November 2nd the second Tuesday in November that people are filing their ballots. And so Democrats are able to use that time to, make sure, if they don't see the ballots coming in from the precincts, they know vote for them. They go out, they go door to door, they stand in front of people, they have them fill out their ballot while other people are watching them, so they are able to harvest every single one of those where people would not have voted before. They're able to pressure people into tipping very tight margins towards Democrats. So unless we tighten up election laws, which Republicans have really not done a very good job of returning us to pre-COVID election norms. So unless we're doing that, the only response that Republicans can have is to also ballot harvest the heck out of the voters that are low in energy that would be returning a Republican ballot.
Yeah. Oh man, that's interesting. I noticed the left-leaning media went crazy in the last couple of days. Trump was speaking to a Christian organization, a very large audience, and he let them know, hey, listen, I love you guys, but you got to get out and vote. I'm a Christian. Let's do this. I will fix the election system so that we don't have these problems in the future. And the left-leaning media, tried to purport that he was saying, I'll rig the elections. You'll never have to vote again, and I'm never leaving office. Like, do they watch every one of his speeches and say, how do we twist his words immediately and get it on CNN and MSNBC and ABC and CBS before people have a chance to fact check anything?
Well, look, I mean, at the Federalist, we noticed that dynamic of selective quotation to twist Trump words all the way back in the 2015 primaries. So we instantly said, anytime there's something reported about Trump, you get the full transcript, you read the whole thing, you put it in context, you never run on what they're supposed to claim. Because, I mean, in the beginning, it seemed like, are these people just like autists? Can they not understand language? Do they not listen to context? There was a little bit of maybe they're just really stupid. But I think, after having that same play run for 8 or more years, 9 years at this point, it's clear that these people don't, they're not really stupid. They're evil. So they just don't care about the truth. They have no incentives for factual reporting because, the internet censorship artificially boosts the misinformation. Washington Post and the New York Times, everyone the Atlantic, all the big outlets that smear Trump, are promoted by these news rating sites such as NewsGuard, which censor people on the right, which censor outlets like the Federalist, like the Blaze, et cetera, et cetera. So there is no ecosystem of holding people to account. And if they make lies, someone checks them, makes them look bad in public, and they have to issue an apology like previously. When you have internet censorship, you are taking away the previous, any semblance of public accountability that you had for just lying about people and misquoting their words. And so it actually amplifies and creates misinformation and disinformation by the very people that claim that these censorship controls are supposed to be doing the opposite.
Yeah, wow. I noticed that Biden looks to be doing one last big push before he's kicked out. And that is this sneaky way of packing the Supreme Court. The Democrats are so mad that Donald Trump was able to get 3 Supreme Court justices in. If he comes back in, which I hope and believe he will, there's a chance for a couple of more. And so they're kind of caught in the same situation where it's like they want to honor the Supreme Court, but they're mad as hell at Ruth Bader Ginsburg for not stepping down while they had the opportunity to fill her seat. So I'm still trying to understand it because it came out. But basically, Biden is saying that like each president will be able to put a justice on every 2 years, then they'll spend 18 years and then they'll come back off the bench. But then over time, the Democrats would be able to pack the Supreme Court with more and more liberal judges. What do you know about this latest development from Joe Biden?
Well, I mean, this sort of scenario that you described, those sorts of details, they actually don't matter. They are just, a sort of placeholder for what we know is the ultimate goal. Democrats really want to be able to take over the one political institution that is not completely beholden to their power. And obviously the Supreme Court isn't even that reliably solid of an originalist jurisprudence court. John Roberts is a squish. He doesn't really care strictly about the Constitution. He's always brokering deals that, basically cut the Constitution in half. You split the baby and you pretend like that's a good decision when what it really is a huge compromise that really makes public policy worse for all Americans and has no fidelity to the actual Constitution. The same is actually, Amy Coney Barrett, she's got a lot more to go. With her tenure, she's still earlier as a justice, but her tenure has also been very similarly unremarkable, really unimpressive in terms of how she's followed John Roberts. Neil Gorsuch has made a number of really, also not constitutional opinions. So even when Republicans, and this is a well-noted point, but even when Republicans appoint justices, it's not like they get actually conservative constitutional results out of them. But the Supreme Court is the one remaining institution that isn't completely corrupted by Democrat political control. So obviously Democrats want to go after that because they want to control all the power. And that is really the only criteria that they have for any move. The reason that you see them doing anything is not because they have any morals, not because they have any values, or they believe in transcendent things like justice and truth. They just use all of those as tools to amass more power for themselves. And we know that's the case because they lie all the time and because they pursue injustices all the time, especially against the vulnerable. All of their policies, like, the homeless tent encampments, for example, those don't benefit people who are sick and without, homes and are so distressed that they're turning to addiction. All it does is enable their bad behavior and have them a living suicide for as long as they continue to live. Right. So Democrats don't really care about, helping the poor and unjust. What they want is to have more power. And so, they want to get a foothold over the Supreme Court because they know when presidents have, the ability to hold, justices up to be mixing up the court very frequently, then that makes the justices even more attuned to politics than they already are. Which again, as I've noted, John Roberts is essentially a political justice, and a number of people on the right wing of the court often follow him. So we do have a at least partially politicized Supreme Court in the leftist direction, but leftists, for them, partial politicization isn't good enough. They want complete leftist control.
Yeah. Oh wow, interesting. Okay, thank you for your insight on that. I don't want to go too deep on the Trump assassination. Only because it's been pretty heavily covered. But the one thing that is really bothersome to me this morning is the two main people that are going to be over getting us the truth are Merrick Garland, who is an anti-Trump Joe Biden puppet, and then Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, who was put in by Trump, but seems to be a Joe Biden-controlled puppet. How are we supposed to have any kind of confidence that these two men are going to get to the bottom of an assassination attempt on a former president of the United States?
Christopher Wray's FBI just made a $2 million settlement with two of the former FBI employees who were notorious for using public resources not only to conduct an affair, but to attempt to use the bureaucracy to have a coup against the elected president of the United States that they disagreed with. That is a public record. They did that with their government emails and other government resources and the power of the police, FBI enforcement powers. And instead, and the idea that it was against their privacy for their government email records to be public, which is required under federal transparency laws, is laughable. But instead of fighting that obvious win, that legal case, Christopher Wray's FBI rewarded those two people for violating, not only just basic conflict of interest problems with their affair that they had, but also for misuse and abuse of their power using spy agency abilities against somebody that American voters voted for into office in 2016. So I don't really think, so that's just the tip of the iceberg. I have written numerous articles, and many of my colleagues have, at the Federalist that talk about the specific and long histories at the Department of Justice and the FBI of corrupting evidence, of doctoring evidence, of using secret spy warrants to surveil the Trump campaign on behalf of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. This is all public record and well documented, and not one of the people involved has been actually had the law applied against them and sanctions applied. Pretty much everyone involved in the Spygate hoaxes has been rewarded by the Department of Justice and the FBI. When the inspector generals of both of those agencies came out and did reports talking about the culture of corruption inside them, that the agencies basically want to use their insane powers to surveil all Americans and to wiretap our phones and watch who we're talking to and who we're listening to, and that they deployed those intelligence resources against a political candidate rather than defending them, using and believing and digesting and putting forward to the media actual Russian disinformation. there's been no accountability for any of that. And so therefore, I think the only conclusion we can come to is that if the DOJ and the FBI heads are involved in any investigation into the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, we can be sure that that investigation is actually a cover-up.
Yeah, that's exactly my worry. That, they're putting themselves at the head of something that they need to make sure that they have no fingerprints on. It's all very, very suspicious. You've written a book, False Flag: Why Queer Politics Means the End of America. I'm sure you saw the opener of the Paris Olympics, where LGBTQ2SA plus people openly mocked Jesus Christ and Christianity. And, a lot of people around the world, including the French, were completely blown away. I mean, there was a child in there. So are they trying to promote pedophilia? There was a transgender woman with a beard. There was a guy who literally his testicles were falling out of his Speedo. Like, why is this on the international stage? Why would mocking Christianity be the opener of the Olympics? Is this a humiliation ritual, or what the heck were your thoughts on that opener?
Well, I mean, humiliation ritual is a really good point, but I actually think we're pretty far beyond that. Because we've been seeing, and I document in my book that, since the very beginning of public homosexual activism, we've really seen that blasphemy against Christians and targeting Christians and anti-Christian animus has been baked into the cake from the beginning. I mean, it's a little confusing, to me as a Christian, because I believe that God loves and has made all people, including homosexual people, and that Jesus Christ died for the sins of everybody. He made and loves gay people as well as he loves other people who are sinners, which is all of us. That's my feelings on the issue. But I also, but from the homosexual side of things, it's very, very common to see direct targeted animus against Christians that is not the same kind that they claim, is directed against them by Christians. So, for example, you see multiple examples of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, for example, are basically a gay activist group that has been around for, I want to say, 30, 40 years now. And they were kind of infamous and recently in the news a couple months ago for being awarded at a Dodgers game, for those are the people. And one of their specialties is in allegedly promoting the gay cause by basically blaspheming and, basically desecrating every single symbol of Christianity they can think of. So, for example, they're called the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence because they wear sexualized nun costumes. They have drag makeup while wearing nun habits. They've done things like, engage in a mock crucifixion. And I also talk about in my book how there's multiple other organizations such as the Satanic Temple, which according to its own members is a majority LGBT organization. And they, a part of their central, rites, or they mock the Christian faith by doing, sexual acts during the rite of the Mass. The Mass is for Catholic Christians, or for Christians who aren't Catholics, it might be called the sacrament or communion. That is the highlight of any church service, and basically the core and the keystone of Christian worship. So they're basically doing their best to say, we hate you, we hate your culture, we hate what is very important to you, and we want to rub your faces in it and just really make you upset and sad. I don't really know why anybody who's well-adjusted and happy would behave that way. It's really interesting that, really this is, and returning to the Olympics, sort of situation, it was just struck me the fact that this is the best that, the queer LGBTQIA plus, people have to offer is deforming somebody else's art. They have no art of their own. They have nothing beautiful. They have no, cultural offerings that they can do. All they have is to tear down other people's things and to desecrate them and to make them look bad. That's really not something that you can build a positive movement about. And I think it really reveals that the queer movement, and as it is in the public eye, the activist types, the people who are out there agitating, they're not as happy as they claim to be. They're not loving. They're not inclusive. They're in fact the opposite of that. They express a lot of very visceral hatred, anger, and the really the wish to hurt people who disagree with them, and even people who love them but say, I don't think the things that you choose to put about, at the front of yourself are really maybe the best thing for you. And they clearly show a lot of psychological torment. And I just really don't think it shows happy people who are really content with their lives on the public stage. Even though they're saying all the opposite, I think it's pretty clear that this is a sad movement. This is a distressed movement. These are people who are angry and really not well psychologically adjusted. And that's really not something that we should put at the forefront of our culture, especially, events that kids would be seeing. The Olympics should, and every other aspect of the public square should be child friendly and family friendly. It should be something that you can invite anyone to, and that would be completely clean. And that's not what we're seeing as part of the public. We're constantly seeing, disgusting sexual acts pushed into the public eye. And I mean, I don't think anyone is pleased by that. And I think it's very telling that that seems to be the only thing that gay activists can do in public.
Yeah. It's interesting how this like new religion or ideology is infiltrating schools and churches, parades. For example, I'm a big believer that the life of Black people matters, but I was not a big fan of Black Lives Matter as an organization. But if you dig in and look at their history, it went from like Black Lives Matter and we want to help Black families to suddenly being about transgender rights, gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer rights, to like Black people didn't even matter. It was just really good for raising money on. And we watched this infiltration. And it's been really interesting, right? Like there are schools now in America that they don't have an American flag, but they can have the gay pride flag or the all-inclusive flag with the light pink and the brown and the, and then you mix it all together. And it's this new religion, this new ideology that they're demanding that people bow down to. Tell us, Joy, about your book, False Flag, why you wrote it, what we're going to learn by reading it.
Well, I really wrote it partly just because I think few people really want to touch the topic of sexuality. I'll be honest, researching the book, there were some really gross things. For example, part of the book I had to look into the people who are trying to make pedophilia a sexual orientation and trying to, include that and have sympathy for people who have an sexual attraction to children. And I'm a mother. That is completely distasteful to me. And so that, that there's some difficult work involved with that. I mean, in discussing, for example, we're told that all of the queer supporting things are about love, right? But I think it's an act of hate to strip, children who are getting transgender treatments, if they have a fake phallus created, one of the ways they do it is to strip the forearm of the child, peel the skin off, and to create that, right? That is an act of hate. It is an act of violence and destruction of the human body and hatred, of the thing that the body is, to harm it. So I was compelled by that, especially being a mother, because, I mean, as I discussed about the internet censorship, which, excuse me, also applies to the queer issue. The internet censors, have stated that they are cutting down, they are hiding people who talk about in a non-affirming way all the LGBT issues. But I was really concerned about the fact that there is very little check on any sexual expression whatsoever, so long as it is not within marriage between two, a male and a female committed together, for the children that they create for life. And because that sort of sexual chaos, and I talk about in the book, really makes people unhappy. So I guess there's really kind of two sections of the book. The first one talks about how basically the identity politics regime that the sexual revolution was really the earliest part of and is a huge part of now, is a competing form of government and way of life to the American Constitution and the way of life that it is created to support it, right? So you cannot, for example, have a self-governing people capable of running their own lives and choosing people, to delegate their authority to through government. People are only able to do that if they have grown into mature, decent human beings. It's unusual in human society to have a government set up where the people get to govern themselves. And our founders said that you had to have a particular kind of people in order to reach that high of a level of civilizational achievement. And those kind of people come from, that's what I argue in the second part of the book, they tend to come from married two-parent families. The lowest risk and the highest reward environment for a child to grow up secure, not, least likely to be a criminal, most likely to be confident, hopeful, not doing anxiety or antidepressant drugs. Every single positive outcome is directly correlated for a child with whether his own two parents were married and stayed together for his entire life. And every single negative outcome for the rest of society that damages the common good is conversely tied to if children do not grow up in a home tied by their own two married parents. They are far more likely, the most likely to be on public assistance. They are less likely to be able to just handle their own financial affairs, more likely to be on every kind of a drug, which most of them now, many of them are paid for, by public funds. So all of that is correlated with the breakdown of the family. Another thing that I talk about in that second half of the book is that people's unhappiness is correlated with family breakdown. You're most likely to be unhappy throughout your life if your parents either did not marry, before you were born, or if they divorced at some time during your life. So sexual chaos is maybe the number one source of people's unhappiness in their lives. And the American founders believed that government should promote human happiness. It was one of its, one of the ways that it secured natural rights was by promoting happiness. So I don't think you can promote human happiness without also promoting the marriage of the people who create children, which can only be a man and a woman. So the two sections of the book really talk about how identity politics transforms our system of government and our way of life into one that opposes and upends our original Constitution and the kind of people needed to create it and preserve it. And the second half of the book really talks about the social effects and these sort of spiraling problems created by the social and the psychological chaos of growing up in homes that are affected by the sexual revolution, and how truly unhappy sexual chaos makes people, makes the people who are marinating in it, which at this point really includes all of us.
Yeah. I remember as we started having children, reading a study that the number one factor in areas where there are gangs on whether a child will join a gang or not was whether they had family dinner.
Yep.
And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that's so simple. Like if a family comes together, they share a meal, they talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of their day, they are significantly less likely to join a gang than if they are eating on their own, or they're not having that family bonding time. Just like it's interesting that little things like that, fatherless homes has a much bigger effect on children than any of us would have guessed. Now that
it's the number one, correlation with poverty. Number one driver of poverty is children not having their father married to their mother.
Yeah, it's all really interesting. And this is how society has functioned for thousands of years. And suddenly now, it's like we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. Is like, no, get rid of this and you'll be happier. And then, but what they're finding is that is not the case. There are social glues that hold society together, and family is a huge part of that. Well, I'm going to
learn this as a journalist, so when I remember when we went from gay to trans, it was like a light. Probably a lot of people in your audience remember that, right? It just was immediate flip, and it was a huge surge of media. Basically, I would call it propaganda, and I document that in the book too. But I remembered when that happened, I started, every time I came across a news story of someone who was transgender, I just started this habit of looking up the person to see what more I could learn about them. And in every single case, I could find more biographical information about someone who was in the news as a trans person. I found out that that was clear that they had some kind of trauma in their family history. So, for example, their parents may have been divorced or never married. They may have had, a sister, or brother die when they were a child. There was some kind of very obvious trauma in their personal history for every single trans person that I've ever looked up, across the news. I challenge your readers to go ahead and try that. But I argue in the book that the family chaos, that people are marinating now is clearly a prime driver of the young people, just what some researchers have called the social contagion of transgenderism. Many young people, if they have a traumatic history, if they have disconnection from, their parents or their peers, or they go through a struggling time, then they see the trans identity as basically offering them things that they don't have, that they should have gotten from having a connected family, not being bullied at school, or whatever the case is. So there are very, very clear links that I go through in the book between family chaos, neighborhood chaos, not having, just a safe and positive, loving home environment where you have your own tribe, people who are genetically connected to you, who love you and show up for you. Huge correlation between that and queer identification. Nobody talks about that.
Oh, interesting. That is an interesting correlation. Well, we're up against time. I'm going to go ahead and put a direct link so that people can go right to the book. I'm going to also put a link to some of your most recent articles over on the Federalist. If people want to follow you, is the best place for them to do that at the Federalist, or is that on Twitter, or both?
Yeah, I have my only social media that I do is my X account. It's, at Joy Pullman, 2 N's in the last name. But if you search my name, you'll also find my author profile at the Federalist, and that has a link to my X account, to my book, and all the articles that I have written there and will continue to write.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Joy, for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.